January 2020, somewhere in Finland, a woman named Tontsarach looks up at her curtains. She has had them 4 years. The fabric came from Anttila. She remembered buying it. Around 2008, pop art style, bold colors, 8 faces, printed across the fabric. She knows who most of them are: Adriana Lima, Josh Holloway, Jessica Alba, but one face has always bothered her. Number 6. A woman in the center of the print. She has seen that face countless times, 4 years, and yet. So on January 27th, 2020, she does what millions of people do when they have a question they cannot answer. She goes online. She posts a photograph of the fabric on Reddit, and she asks a simple question: who are these celebrities? She has no idea what is about to happen, because that innocent question will eventually lead to one of the strangest internet investigations ever documented. If you have ever found yourself falling down a rabbit hole online, chasing a question that shouldn't matter, but somehow does, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Block 2. This is Rulik Enigmas. Every week, we go places most people don't think to look. Subscribe now and turn on the bell, because what you are about to hear is not a murder mystery. It is not a cold case. It is something stranger than either of those things. It is the story of how thousands of strangers across the internet became obsessed with identifying a woman whose face was printed on a curtain. To understand why this case consumed the internet for more than 4 years, you need to understand what made it so difficult. Tontsarach's fabric showed 8 faces, rendered in a high contrast, pop art style, bold outlines, reduced colors, simplified facial features, the kind of graphic treatment that makes a photograph recognizable while removing many of the details that normally allow us to recognize a person. 7 of the 8 faces were identified. Adriana Lima appeared twice. Josh Holloway was number 2. Jessica Alba was number 4. Travis Fimmel was number 5. Ian Somerhalder was number 7. And Orlando Bloom was number 8. 7 faces, 7 names, 1 left. Number 6. A woman, almost certainly, positioned in the center of the fabric, rendered in exactly the same graphic style as everyone else, but something about her face resisted every attempt to identify her. Was she a celebrity, a model, an actress, someone who had appeared in a magazine, but had never become famous? Or perhaps someone whose photograph had simply been chosen by the designer for no particular reason? Nobody knew, and the not knowing became the entire point. The search eventually became big enough to receive its own name, CelebrityNumberSix, and then, eventually, its own subreddit, r/CelebrityNumberSix. Think about that. For a moment, a single unidentified face on a piece of fabric became the subject of an entire online community. People began collecting possible identities. They built spreadsheets. They searched old magazines. They compared faces. They examined hairstyles. They compared noses, eyes, cheekbones, and jawlines. They searched archives. They used reverse image search. They altered the image. They changed contrast. They experimented with color. They tried to reconstruct what the original photograph might have looked like. They contacted people connected to the fabric. They searched for the original manufacturer. And they went looking for the source photographs. Of the other 7 faces, eventually, they discovered that the fabric had been sold through Anttila and appeared in an Anttila Summer 2009 catalogue under the name Figures. The fabric was available in different color variations, and researchers also traced it to a supplier, Látky Mráz, in the Czech Republic. But even after finding the fabric itself, one question remained unanswered: who was number 6? The community tried everything. They searched Getty Images, they searched old fashion campaigns, they looked through photographs taken by photographers associated with the other celebrities, they searched archives. They searched for models who had worked with the same agencies. They searched for people who had appeared in the same magazines. They searched for people who looked like the image. They searched for people with similar hairstyles. And every time a candidate appeared, the same thing happened: hope, excitement, investigation, and eventually, another dead end. The community couldn't even agree on the person's gender in one poll. Roughly 65% believed number 6 was a woman. The other 35% thought the person could be a man. That uncertainty made the search even harder, because if you don't know who you are looking for, you don't even know which direction to search. Hundreds of names were proposed. Some were models, some were actresses, some were celebrities, some were almost completely unknown, some looked astonishingly similar, but similarity wasn't enough. The community had learned that lesson. Repeatedly, they needed proof. They needed the original photograph. They needed a source. And above all, they needed someone who could say, yes, that's the photograph, that's the person. Years passed. The pandemic arrived. The world changed. People who had joined the investigation during lockdown eventually returned to normal life. Jobs changed. Families changed. People moved. The world moved on. CelebrityNumberSix did not. The subreddit remained active. The spreadsheets remained. The theories remained. And somewhere in the middle of all of it was the same face, still unidentified, still staring out from a piece of fabric. Then, in 2024, after more than 4 years of failed searches, someone tried something different. A Reddit user named StefanMorse took the image and attempted to reverse some of the visual transformation. The original fabric image was essentially two-tone. It didn't look like a normal photograph anymore. So StefanMorse manually colored the image, trying to make the face resemble a realistic photograph. Then he ran the altered image through PimEyes, a facial recognition-based reverse image search engine. And something happened. The results weren't definitive, but one name appeared again and again: Leticia Sardá, a Spanish model who had worked in fashion during the 2000s. Suddenly, after years of searching, the community had a serious lead. But there was a problem. A lead was not proof. The community had seen promising candidates before. They had spent years being excited about people who eventually turned out to be wrong. So this time, they needed something stronger. They needed to find the original photograph. And this is where the investigation became a genuine piece of internet detective work. Another Reddit user, Duckies15, had also been investigating the lead and helped identify Sarda by name and make contact with her former agency. Then another investigator entered the story, a Reddit user named IndigoRoom. IndigoRoom began searching through Sarda's modeling history and eventually found an image That looked remarkably familiar. It came from a 2006 fashion shoot, connected to Woman magazine, issue number 162. Specifically a trend supplement, the model was Leticia Sardá. The face matched, the expression matched, the pose matched, the hair matched. The mysterious woman on the curtain was suddenly no longer just a theory. There was a photograph, and there was a name, but there was still one more piece missing. Who had taken the photograph? IndigoRoom tracked down the photographer. His name was Leandre Escorsell, and IndigoRoom contacted him. The question was simple: did he recognize the photograph? Escorsell replied, and his answer changed everything. Yes, he had taken the photograph himself. The image was real. It wasn't a reconstruction. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an AI-generated image. It was an actual photograph of Leticia Sardá, and Escorsell still had the original. He sent it. The original photograph was compared with the image on the fabric, and the match was extraordinary. The face, the pose, the hair, the expression, the composition. Everything lined up. After more than 4 years of searching, CelebrityNumberSix had finally been traced back to its source, but the story still wasn't over. Because when IndigoRoom announced the discovery on September 8, 2024, not everyone immediately believed it. Some members of the community suspected that the original photograph might have been generated or manipulated using artificial intelligence. It sounds almost absurd after 4 years of searching for a real photograph. The community was now suspicious that the photograph itself might be fake, but the skepticism was understandable. The internet had changed dramatically. Since the investigation began, AI-generated images had become common, and the community had spent years trying to avoid being fooled. So people questioned the evidence. They questioned the photograph. They questioned whether the discovery was genuine, but there was one person who could settle the question better than anyone else: the woman in the photograph. Leticia Sardá. On September 9, 2024, the day after the original photograph was revealed, Sarda confirmed that she was the woman in the image. She posted a photograph of herself holding the original picture. The mystery was over. CelebrityNumberSix was Leticia Sardá, but there was something almost unbelievable about the ending. Leticia had no idea that any of this had been happening. She had left modeling. Years earlier, she had returned to Tenerife. She had built a quiet life away from the fashion industry. She had no reason to know that thousands of people on the other side of the internet had spent years searching for her face. She wasn't looking for fame. She wasn't trying to become famous again. She was simply living her life. Meanwhile, her face had been printed on fabric. People had been staring at it. 4 years, and strangers across the world had been trying to figure out who she was. Then suddenly, someone contacted her, and she discovered that she had unknowingly become one of the internet's longest-running mysteries. Imagine that you wake up one morning and discover that thousands of strangers have spent years trying to identify you. Not because you disappeared, not because you committed a crime, not because anyone was looking for you for some urgent reason, just because your face appeared on a curtain and people wanted to know your name. The story became even more personal. When Sarda found the original photograph herself, she still had a copy. The photograph that had once been part of her modeling career had somehow traveled across countries and eventually ended up on a piece of fabric. Then, years later, that same photograph became the key to finding her, and the internet community didn't simply celebrate the discovery, they wanted to thank her. A GoFundMe was organized. As a farewell gift for Sarda, it eventually raised €2,225 from 23 donations. The money was intended for Leticia and her family. She also agreed to provide signed prints of the original photograph to some donors for a mystery that had begun with a random face on a curtain. The ending had become strangely personal. The community had found the woman, and now they wanted to give something back. Sarda later participated in an AMA with the Reddit community, the same people who had spent years searching for her were finally able to ask her questions directly. Think about how strange that must have been for 4 years. She was an image, a face, a theory, a name that nobody knew, and suddenly, she was there, answering questions, talking to the people who had searched for her. The mystery had turned into a conversation between the person at the center of it and the people who had spent years looking for her. And there was another unresolved part of the story. The photographer, Leandre Escorsell, expressed frustration that his photograph appeared to have been used on the fabric. Without his authorization, he had taken the original image of Sarda in 2006. Somehow, that photograph eventually became part of the figure's fabric design, exactly how the designer obtained the photograph and who ultimately decided to use it remains unclear. The designer's identity has not been established. So even though CelebrityNumberSix has been solved, one small mystery remains attached to it. We know the woman, we know the photographer, we know the original photograph, we know the fabric, we know where it was sold, but we don't know exactly who decided that this particular photograph should become part of the design, and perhaps we never will, but in a strange way, that's almost fitting. Because CelebrityNumberSix was never really a story about crime. Nobody had been murdered, nobody had been kidnapped, nobody was missing, nobody was in danger. There was no ransom, no criminal investigation, no reward, no deadline. There was simply a face on a curtain, and an internet that couldn't let it go. Thousands of strangers from different countries spent years trying to answer a question that had almost no practical importance. They didn't know Leticia. They didn't know where she lived. They didn't know whether she was still modeling. They didn't know whether she even remembered the photograph. They simply wanted to know, and that is what makes CelebrityNumberSix so fascinating. Human curiosity doesn't always need a reason. Sometimes an unanswered question is enough. 7 faces had names. Why not the 8th? 7 could be explained. Why not 6? And because the internet allows thousands of people to work on the same problem at the same time, a completely ordinary mystery can become something enormous. One person finds a photograph, another notices a similarity, another searches an archive, another finds a name, another contacts an agency. Another finds a photographer, another gets the original image, and eventually, all those tiny pieces connect. That is what happened here. StefanMorse experiment with PimEyes created the breakthrough. Ducky's 15 helped turn the lead into an identifiable person and pursued confirmation. Through Sarda's former agency, IndigoRoom tracked down the photographer. Leandre Escorsell provided the original photograph, and Leticia Sardá herself gave the final confirmation. No single person solved the mystery alone. The internet did. And perhaps that is the real story, not the identity of CelebrityNumberSix, but what happens when thousands of ordinary people decide that one unanswered question deserves their attention. The woman in the photograph had left modeling, she had returned to Tenerife, she had built a quieter life, she had no idea that her face had become famous. All over again. No idea that strangers were searching for her, no idea that an entire subreddit had been built around her, no idea that people had spent years examining photographs and comparing faces just to put a name to the woman on a curtain, and then one day a message arrived and suddenly the world knew her name, Leticia Sardá. Before you scroll, I want you to think about one thing. Somewhere in Finland, someone looked at a curtain and asked a simple question: who is that woman? 4.5 years later, a former model in Tenerife learned that tens of thousands of people had been trying to answer it. That is what the internet can do. When it decides to care about something, it can turn a forgotten photograph into a global mystery. It can connect strangers who have never met. It can revive an image that had disappeared from the public internet. And sometimes, against all odds, it can find the person standing behind the picture. Tell me in the comments, did you follow the CelebrityNumberSix case when it was happening? And do you think the photograph should have been used on the fabric without the photographer's authorization? If stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe to Rulik Enigmas and turn on the bell. We are a small channel, but every subscriber genuinely matters. Every person who watches helps us tell one more story worth telling, because next week we open another mystery, and it may surprise you even more than this one.